Aloha. Welcome to Return on Wellness, a web series brought to you by Olympian Meeting.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Return on Wellness. I am here with Dr. Jess Garza. I pronounced it correctly. Good. I'm very excited about this episode. Today, we're going to dig into the importance of your mind, and I'm going to have her go into her credentials as to why she is the expert in this. But we're going to talk about a little bit of the mental health side of things.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people. There's a group called Event Minds Matter, and they are focused on mental well-being and whatnot. I like to think of it as a bigger picture. And as we discussed before, we're going to also dig into, sure, meditation is great for you, but we're going to talk a little bit as to the whys and what's really biologically and clinically happening in your body when you do things like that for your mind. So,
yeah.
Dr. Jess, without any further ado, if you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us what you've been up to.
Sounds good. I'm Dr. Jess Garza. A couple of my credentials, I have 2 masters, one in sport and exercise psychology, another in mental health counseling, and then I have a PhD in performance psychology as well. Also a PMP, so I'm a project management professional, and then I am a licensed mental health counselor and a national certified counselor.
Okay, that's a lot of certifications. For those of you that are familiar with the industry, that's almost as many letters as a guy named Gary Murakami. He has like CMP, CMM, et cetera, et cetera.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. Can you break down a couple of those for us and what they are? And let's start with the first one, which is the performance. You said performance psychologist, right?
Yeah, so I am with the Association of Applied Sports Psychology, and that is where you are certified as a mental performance coach. And so a lot of us work in tactical populations, whether that be the military, first responders, EMTs, or with soldiers, like special operations, which was my background, working with them in the military intelligence. And then now I own my own company, Altier, out here in Cedar Park, that works with Olympians, professional athletes in just about every sport that you can possibly think of, from professional softball, NFL, NBA, Major League Soccer, gymnastics, all the way down to youth elite level as well. So, I mean, I have some 8-year-olds that are these incredible elite figure skaters, soccer players, all the above.
Now, if it's okay, I'd like to dig into that topic just a little bit, because I think all of us had a bit of an epiphany. If we didn't beforehand, we'll talk about kind of the 2 big names, which I probably don't even have to tell you who they're going to be. But a lot of people weren't really up to speed on Michael Phelps until he became very open about it.
Yeah.
And then Simone Biles
was another big one.
Yeah, we all watched during the pandemic when we were all realizing how important our mental health was to us and going through things that none of us had ever experienced before.
Yep.
Watching someone who you just presume, which we know what happens when you assume,
Right.
has her shit together, for lack of a better term, and she just was like, "That's it, I'm done."
Yeah.
What kind of struggles is it? Is it just the pressure, or? And I'm not asking you to diagnose what was going on with her or either of them, but like, what are some of the things that you see with people in these high pressure roles?
I think a lot of it is expectation from outside, from social media, from coaches. You're on the biggest world stage that you can possibly be on. So you have constant eyes. So that's the level of pressure. But pressure is really off of perception. And so the perception that we create in our world based off of expectations is really what limits our ability to perform at our best. When I say expectations, it could be of self and it could be of other people, what they have about me or for me, and then what I have for myself too. So I think some of those expectations is that when you're at the top, you constantly have to be on the game. There's nothing wrong. They're always like the best of the best. And their mentality should be that way too. And so we'll start to hear people talk in those really finite, absolute language. So they should be able to perform because they're an elite athlete. Well, they're also human too. So that nice little should be term, right?
Are they though?
They're extraordinary human beings, but they are human beings. And I think these words that we put on people start to filter into their brain to where they really create belief systems around them, which causes them to then live in these false realities that I always have to be on and I can never take a break. And so the always nevers are also forms of absolutes that are created where if I look weak, then I must not be okay. And that's not true.
That's fascinating. I do not live in that world, so I can't even imagine the level of pressure that comes with that. But I think we all live in a world where perception and external perception impacts all of us.
Absolutely.
A couple episodes ago, actually the last episode, I sat down with a chief marketing officer. And then before that, I sat down with someone who I have deemed the fittest event professional in the world because she went to the CrossFit Games.
Oh, yeah.
So that's she's the only one I know that does events that was competing at the highest
awesome.
Possible level.
Yeah.
But we talked about perception because when you're making time for yourself at work, and let's say you find you feel the best after a midday workout, and you start getting pressure from your boss or people, and well, the perception is if without digging into it too much, you have any helpful ideas or tips, or someone that's dealing with a perception issue as to how to deal with that internally and work through it?
That could be like a whole 3-hour
Yeah,
session.
I'm sure.
Itself.
That's why I was like, let's call it tips for dummies.
No, that's good. So I would say first, it's like what you really want to break down is what you're perceiving the world as, because our perceptions of how we view the world are going to be completely different. The lenses in which we see the world is our reality. And so we often pick up these filters or put on glasses in which we tend to view the world based off of, past experiences, belief systems, or what other people tell me that I should believe or see or do. So understanding the film or the filter in which I look through would be number one. And if it's more of a pessimistic or a perception that I'm not doing enough or that I am not enough, I'll often gravitate what we call the confirmation bias, collect evidence that will create that experience to be true. And so if I feel that my boss is constantly on me, always gives me more, whatever the scenario is, I will look only for that type of validation or information to solidify that belief system of how I'm viewing the world. So then it just recreates and builds stronger systems that I get stuck. If I don't actively try to look at it from a different lens of like, well, he only gave me 2 assignments. It wasn't a lot. It was just I felt overwhelmed by everything else that I had going on. So how I view where I call it like the flashlight method. Where I'm shining my flashlight is going to determine what I'm looking at. So if the light was off and I have my flashlight looking in the corner of the room and it's all negative things of all the things that I haven't done yet, that I need to do, that I could have done better, I'm going to get overwhelmed because there's still a really big task or list that I need to complete. But if I just would have shifted my attention just a little bit to the right, I would have noticed all the things that I completed and all the things that I did well and everything that I gotten compliments before that day, previous days, all the things.
Or a light switch.
Yep. Yeah, just everything. So dimming one light and allowing the other one to come up helps us perceive the world differently and creating new experiences and belief systems, not on past things that we're attending to that weren't so well.
Now, can that confirmation bias also work towards stating your case? So let's say someone is trying to push an outside perception on you. They're saying, oh, you're gone for 2 hours a day. Your coworkers think you're slacking off, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, but I get all my work done.
Right.
Can that work the other way as well?
It could, but that now you're kind of leaning in towards what we call emotional contagion. And so emotional contagion is where people either like to project or they'll put their emotions towards you, and you can choose to accept those emotions or you can choose to not. And so a lot of times, even now, we're transferring energy back and forth between each other. And if I don't do my own energetic hygiene or cleansing throughout the day, I can take on your emotions as my own and not be aware of it. So if you start to feel irritated or annoyed because you have so much stuff that you didn't get done on your plate and now you're projecting that towards me, I can start to feel overwhelmed and be like, what do I need to do? But I'm like, I got my work done, but I feel like I need to do more or something, and not understanding why I just got overwhelmed. If I don't pay attention to that, then I go into another room and I start to just unload on somebody else, or I take on somebody else's. And every day, all day, you're constantly intervening with people in their electromagnetic fields where we're either accepting others or pushing ours to somebody else, which is why you can feel so heavy and lethargic and tired and everything else throughout the day, because we're constantly in each other's fields collecting energies, but not paying attention to what we're collecting.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. Well, that's a wrap. That's all my brain is going to be able to handle today. No. Okay. I think that's super helpful. One of the things that we were talking about. So the 2 guests ago, the girl who went to the games, she had just joined a company and she was the head of events and community.
Okay.
And she was mid-training to go, and she was launching this brand.
Oh, wow.
Now, fortunately, the company was run by professional CrossFitters.
Yeah.
So they understood what was happening, and it was a very easy conversation. But what it led to was another conversation with the CMO about how if someone who's a practitioner or executioner, how do they approach their boss with something big that they want to do so that they can set expectations appropriately?
Very carefully.
Well, yes, true. But the key was communication,
Right.
which I think helps regulate a lot of what you were talking about.
But it's also understanding their lens too. So now we're kind of going into a different realm where we call like the 3 levels of empathy. And so the 3 levels, this is from Daniel Goldman's work, who does a lot on emotional intelligence. Communication is a big factor in emotional intelligence. But he talks about these 3 levels of empathy. So the first one is cognitive. I have to know how you are as a person or what the problem set is. So if I know that I wanted to implement whatever big project, I have to find the empty void of where I'm going to fill that in and where he sees value in it. I know the value. I have to see from his lens what that value is from a cognitive standpoint. So cognitively understanding the problem set or understanding the person. The second level would be emotional state. I have to get him emotionally invested into this, but I have to use his words in their emotions, not mine. So if I'm like, I'm really excited about this will really help the company, this will do blah, blah, blah. Again, that's my perspective of what I feel, but not what his needs are or what the company's needs are.
Right.
So understanding that from the emotional side and then drawing in his emotion or whatever that problem set is, creating an emotional state that might elicit some level of anxiety or worry of like, if we don't do this, this might happen. So I'm creating some spark around it. And then the last one is empathic concern. So this is where I take action. Don't worry, here's all of our problems. This is the disaster that could happen from an emotional standpoint. Here's why it's happening. But I got you. I'm your person, and here's the reason why we're going to implement this project, because it's going to take all that away. So that's the action piece to those 3 levels of empathy.
I'm going to stumble out of here because my brain is going to be overflowing with information. Okay, I love that we just jumped right into it and got into it. I would like to, and maybe there's nothing behind it, but when we scheduled this, I was like, hey, what time do you think is a good time of day to do this? So for a little background, we met at a community factory event.
Yeah.
And you said one thing in one of our little groups, and I was like, oh my goodness, there's so much that I don't know. And you mentioned, you're like, hey, if you want someone to sign a contract, do it between 1 and 3,
Yes.
blah, blah, blah. And you went into a little bit, and I thought, okay, there's a lot of more information that I think a lot of people could benefit from. So I asked you today, because I figured, why not ask the expert?
Yeah.
I was like, what time of day should we do this? And you suggested 11 o'clock. Can I ask why you picked that time? Maybe just because it worked with your calendar, or maybe there was a bigger meaning behind it?
Not necessarily. It did work actually well with my calendar.
Okay.
When we talked about it at the Community Factory event, what I had suggested was it's based on our circadian rhythm. And so everybody has a 24-hour cycle that we operate from. And typically that 12 to 3 period is what we call the postprandial dip, where our cognitive...
Right. Everyone knows that.
Come on. Where our cognitive functions are at its lowest. So our attention is not high. This is where you want to do more like remote type of things that you've done a bazillion times over. We are really good in our profession of understanding material and how to execute it, how to present it. So the 11 o'clock, we're still at that alert phase, haven't hit towards the post-prandial dip.
It makes me feel better that you struggled with it.
All the time. So this was still allowing us to get our morning alertness, which is what the morning time is from like 9 to 12 or 9 to 11:30ish time frame, where you're most alert from the cognitive aspect. So having big meetings, anything really important that you need to get done, executing it during that period. This is also a really good time for endurance running for your body. It's most primed for. And then in the evening, what we call the wake maintenance zone. This is where you have more powerlifting is the best during that period, not cardio, but more like weightlifting.
Like after 3 o'clock?
After 3 o'clock, yeah. So
I always felt
later in
like
the evening.
whenever I would go to like a 5 p.m. class, I always felt like I could lift more.
Isn't that weird? Yeah, your body's primed
I just
for
thought because like I had eaten and I had food and I had all the metabolic things taken care of, but it was a mental thing as well.
Yep, absolutely. But in physiology, it's all it's just how our body's circadian rhythm is naturally designed to perform at its best. And so when I worked in the military for almost 14 years, and what we noticed was their most critical meetings that we would have about, well, not we, but the soldiers and officials would have about either like declaring war or talking about really high mission stakes. They were doing it during lunch hour. And I'm like, well, this is kind of scary. Like your brain's not at its most prime. So we ended up encouraging them to shift their meeting times around. And they ended up doing it in the morning where we were like, your brain's most primed to be alert and make these clear decisions. And then the most mundane, like doing your emails or responding to people or whatever the like lazier tasks are, then you would do them during that period. But the 11 o'clock phase, we're still pretty alert. So I was like, well, this will be really good.
And I'm post workout as well, so I'm extra alert. I did my workout this morning. Okay, so I think where I want to connect the dots for people, since this was called Return on Wellness and it's designed for events people, is think about what just got talked about as you're building your agenda.
Yes.
So is your CEO going on at 1 o'clock, post lunch? When everyone, let alone you add food to that, right? And then you put them in a dark room and blah, 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 blah. Like
you're just making them go to sleep. You're having like insulin levels drop. You're like hormones aren't like the whole part of the body is just not alert. It's going into a digestive state. So your parasympathetic system is completely activated and you're not wanting to take that away because that's how your body is designed to digest everything. But when we talk about food, we're not having like these big meals during those times. It's just small little snacks that you would want to have during that period or smaller meals so that they don't go into a heavy rest state rather than it's just because you still want to have that parasympathetic activation, just not at the level of what we're doing.
Agreed. So I think we can kind of dig into event design and touch on your PMP stuff. I know we're a little out of order from the list I sent, but with that, one of the things I've had the best luck with is if you're doing team building activities or things that require movement or standing up or interacting with people or whatnot, tends to get people out of that that lunchtime lull.
Yep.
And that's not by accident.
Nope, it's not. So you're talking about things that can countermeasures for that postprandial dip. Caffeine, a stimulant, is one. But then you can, but not recommended to have that caffeine past 3 o'clock.
Right.
Because of the life shell cycle of getting that caffeine out of your system. If you're doing it past 3 o'clock, it can take up to like 8, 9 at night before it really starts to shut itself down. Vitamin D is another really big one. So doing like team building activities outside immediately alerts the brain, gets it up, wakes up, sensation or sensory type of aspects. So when you're talking about getting up and moving and doing team building, you're having to grab things, you're interacting. So it's a very sensory oriented exercise, which is one thing that helps the body wake itself back up during that period.
Got it. Okay. Now that makes perfect sense. So it sounds like as you're thinking through when people's, and then we're going to dig into this too, we're going to talk about what parts of the brain you need to learn, which should be really fun. Because the whole thing behind this is we spend so much money on events and flying people all over the place, spending money on hotels, renting all this AV, but the food that like you name it. And then are we undermining our efforts by how the event is designed to play to our executive team's egos. So I want to dig into a little bit.
You're giving me chills. So yes to that, because yeah.
Good. Because that's what this return on wellness concept is we spend $1 million on a meeting for 500 people. That's on a good day. And then we're basically, depending on how we structure it,
Yep.
we're flushing half the results.
It's wild. And you talk about this goes across every industry. I've gone to so many different conferences, whether it's been a medical, like physician conference. Those
are usually, the food is the worst at those.
The worst. Really, though. They are awful. And then from a sports psychology conference that I've gone to business conferences, to trade shows, like the events that I've been a part of, they all tend to be very, very similar. And if you're going to like those medical ones or to like any type of, some of the gymnastics ones that I've gone to, it is lecture by lecture by lecture. We have to shove in so many at a certain time. You get a small little break and it's like some snacks, whatever that may be. And then you go and sit for however many hours for the afternoon sessions. And then your late evening, and it just rinse and repeats the next day. People aren't getting up. They're not active. The attention spans, you're having lectures for an hour and a half. Some of them are workshops, but even the workshops are still talking, and it's just like, here's your handout as a part of the workshop, not actual engagement of the applied aspect. It's baffling to me. So you're not retaining as much information. Even in my field that teaches like attention spans and cognitive functioning, and this is no disc on my association by any means, it's just the way that it's been done continues to be done, and so nobody's really ignited a different way, except, the community factory has been like the biggest one that I've seen that's changed the way that they implement the dynamic of how people are integrating in those different type of network settings. But
hi, Liz and Nicole.
Yes, hi. Shout out to you. But it's fantastic because the retention is just so much better, and then how people are remembering those events makes such a big difference too. So it needs to be changed completely, the way that it's been done.
Well, in the effort of community and practicality, and I like helping people connect the dots, let's talk through what an ideal day would be, if you're okay with that, and what kind of sessions you would put where in the day. So traditionally, the session usually is like, there's a breakfast that starts at some god-awful hour, like 8 o'clock in the morning. So if you want to work out, you have to get up at like 5 or 6 and do that. That keynote is usually somewhere between 45 to 90 minutes, followed by another one, and then like another one, and then you go to lunch. And then if you're lucky, you go into breakouts afterwards where there's mild movement, but each of the breakouts are like 45 minutes to an hour long. I'm going to cite something before we dig into this because I think it's a really key illustration about TSA agents. They don't sit in any given position behind whatever their role is for more than 30 minutes the most. The ideal time is 15 minutes. Yeah. And it's a very similar thing to radar air traffic controllers. The tower, I think you could probably speak to this. The tower is a much more dynamic environment. You're looking, you're talking, you're only dealing with one kind of, maybe 2 planes at a time. I don't know. Right. But in radar, you're dealing with hundreds of planes. You're in a dark room. They also only work, I think it's like 20 minutes in any given stint because our attention spans aren't built for 45 minutes, 90 minutes. What's, in your experience, what kind of is the ideal attention span where after you cross that threshold, you're starting to get into
cognitive fatigue?
Yes.
Yeah.
I appreciate your clinical term.
You're good. I would probably say anywhere from like 20 to 25 minutes. 30 is like your max. We're talking about like intense concentration, but even in that 30 minutes, like people, I would say this is kind of hard to go back and forth because 30 minutes is probably most ideal, not ideal, but like max. And then in between there, because of the way that social media has been, our society nowadays, our attention can't hold as long because it's constantly needing these like instant gratifications or more levels of like dopamine, if you will, of what we're getting for gratification and that quick stimulant response, or serotonin, like all of those different chemicals. But with that being said, I would say if we're going to high level of engagement, 15 to 20 minutes is probably the most pristine or ideal time frame to stay engaged on a specific task. In TSA, we actually did a lot of work with them. with cognitive fatigue and just attention, because this was during the time where they were on like high alert and burnout was happening excessively. This is also during the period of like when things were happening at a lot of different airports. And so we went in to make sure how they were scanning and what they were looking for, that they could pick out objects really, really fast and be able to identify what was wrong. So we were doing quick like attention span, peripheral vision. So we're watching people off to the side while they're having to look at the objects in the screen and be able to interpret them really fast, but then look at body language. And
Wow.
so they have a lot to process because they're not just looking at the screen. They're looking at people in line, looking at odd behaviors. If there's anybody that looks susceptible or that they need to pick out to be able to be screened more.
You want to talk about working as fast as possible while being as thorough as possible.
Yes. And then the other part was the empathy piece, because they were getting known as like being super hard and like rude in those environments, which I don't know if it's necessarily changed as much, but how they would approach other people was another really big one. But they were just getting so burned out because they had a lack of shortage of people that were in their positions as well.
Right.
So that was a lot. So they were getting
Wow.
tired. So yes, on rotation, but that didn't mean that the job stopped for them. That
Right.
just mean their spot changed, but that didn't mean that they were resting their brain or having to actually take a break.
Do they get a break when they're moving positions, or do they just run into
They just
the
go
next?
to the next position.
Got it. They just rotate.
Yep.
Okay. I asked that question intentionally as we circle back to the event design, as what would you, in an ideal situation, what session and how long would it be would you open the day with? So
Yeah.
is the other thing is 8 a.m. too early for a breakfast, or should you push it out a little more?
It's not too early for a breakfast.
Okay.
Depending on, those that are fasting or not, because
Fair
that's a
enough.
whole nother level of like body physiology that
Yeah.
you can go into. But your morning alert zone starts around like 7 a.m.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be too far later. I think that we tend to do better because we have more rest at that period, because a lot of people either will stay up later, so we're still getting more rest if we push it back a little bit later. People don't feel as rushed having to get to the event as quickly. They're not in their environment, their typical environment, so they're already kind of not in the routine of what they need to do their morning routine as. They're having to figure that out like on the spot, or if they're used to going to several of these events, then they know it. But most people don't have a routine in the morning, and so that can throw them off. So if you're asking to start about a little bit later, like around 9,
Yeah.
then, I mean, that's ideal for them to be able to get whatever their own personal stuff out of the way and then be able to show up fully attentive. But from a physiological aspect, time-wise, It's not that big of a deal. But from an attention aspect of if there's other crap that's going on ahead of time, it allows them to get that stuff out of the way and then go into.
Got it. Okay, so 8:30,
Yeah.
9 o'clock is perfectly acceptable. What kind of session would you start that day with? Would you open with whatever is kind of the most important
Yes.
and
The most complex one, I would say.
most
'Cause-
complex?
Yes.
Okay.
Or most important at that. Whatever the most valuable information that you're wanting to get out for people to retain, I would probably have that as like your 9 or 10 session, because that's when people are most alert. So that you might have some foggy people in the morning that maybe didn't sleep well. And so if you're waking up in between cycles, it almost takes 2 hours for them to get back to a complete alert state. So let's just say my alarm went off at 6 o'clock. I hit the snooze button for 30 minutes. And even in that 30 minutes, because it's not a full REM cycle,
Right.
it will cause me to wait another like hour and a half to 2 hours to actually be cognitively alert. And so now you're waiting till 8, 9 to even get out of that foggy state, or like, oh, I'm still so tired. And it's not that you're still so tired. It's because your brain's having to still go through the cycle to get to that point of being alert and
Got it.
awake. So then maybe I'd say like your 10 o'clock would probably be the most pristine session that you have.
What about a break? Because we know those don't usually exist between the 9
Yes.
o'clock and the 10 o'clock session.
Right.
How do you need much time for people? There's been that image that's been all over that Microsoft did, and it's like Zoom fatigue and blah, blah, blah. But it's
It's a big one.
yeah, it goes around. So how much time do people really need for a mental break? And is just changing speakers enough?
Say, yes, they need a mental break, and changing speakers is not enough.
Okay.
It is when you have different, maybe like sexes and different tones and the way that they approach things, that can cause them to be alert. So yes, it can, but it's not the most effective, if that makes sense.
What is the most effective?
So for time-wise, 10 minutes it's not a bad break. That's the most recommended, like 10 minutes in between. And when you are in that break, it's actually excluding yourself from the environment that you're about to go back in. So getting out of those doors, standing up, getting some physical exercise. Or if we were still in the room that we needed to stay in, then everybody get up, then does like 20 jumping jacks or 10 push-ups. And that's not the norm because you're in, like,
right.
We're in a business suit and people are like, yeah, cool, I'm going to do 10 push-ups right now. No, probably not. We're in a dress or something along those lines. But even just like arm circles or lifting your legs, something to get the heart rate up a little bit so that your body has the blood flow, not just going to your digestive tract, because that's really what's happening is that you just got done eating breakfast and all the blood flow is going towards your stomach to the digestive system to be able to break down all of those enzymes that's happening in the stomach.
That's also why you usually get cold after you eat, right?
Yeah.
Huh?
Look at that.
Hey, I knew something. What do you know? Okay, so there's someone I'm connected with on LinkedIn who talks about like micro movements. So that's pretty much that. Like,
that is.
Just stand up, go get some water,
Yep.
whatever. Just do something instead of just sitting there.
Correct.
Rolling into one session after another.
Yep. Getting the blood flow to move so that it's activating more oxygen and blood to the brain so that it can regenerate its attention back to the task at hand.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a little mental distraction. What, and this is where I want to nerd out a little bit because I love this stuff. What physiologically happens when you, and you can speak to this to whatever level you're comfortable with it, but when you're hyper focused on a task at hand and you're listening to your executive tell you about if you're getting company bonuses or not.
Yeah.
Because usually these are like sales kickoffs or things of that nature. When you get up and move, besides from the blood flow, what else is happening to your body's chemistry that can potentially impact your ability to continue learning instead of just not retaining any more information?
Are you referring it to like from an attention standpoint, or are you talking about from, because when you're taking the break? Is that what?
Yeah.
When you're asking?
So because you're sitting there and you're hyper focused, and I'm sure there are a number of things that's happening in your brain, and you're in a sense you're having a mental workout.
Yeah.
Because things are happening in your brain, and you're trying to register things, and your brain is doing what it does. What is the benefit of that break? Like, what happens that then makes you able to go back to it?
Yeah. So when you're doing two things. One, your visual cortex, which is in the occipital lobe in the back of your head, is trying to constantly process whatever it's watching in that moment, or whatever keynote or lecture or the executive that's presenting. So it's interpreting what it's seeing and then what it's hearing. So then it's coming up to what we call the prefrontal cortex, which is your attention, your decision-making, creativity, all of your executive functioning skills to do X. Your planning, your strategizing, all of those things. So if you're like, ooh, if I need to strategize, if he's not going to mention my name in my raise, then I need to figure out a way. Like, your brain's just constantly going on all cylinders up there. But it's taking information in from the visual cortex. And so those two are constantly going back and forth and having to process information. Then you have the amygdala part of the brain, that's the emotional part. So let's just say they say something that you don't like, and now the emotions start to get triggered. And most people think that the amygdala is your threat kind of state, where it's like, oh, it's something
fight or flight.
Yeah. But really it's assessing familiarity. So have I been in this position before? Have I been in this environment before? Have I heard the same speech before? And if it's off and it does feel, whether it's perceived or real, threatening to my position, to my pay, to whatever, then it starts to kick on like, oh, now I need to be extra alert because whatever's happening, like I need to take action kind of thing. And so if that gets activated, now you're talking about even more energy production from a cognitive, physical, and emotional level, because now we're starting to send stuff down the spine. Your heart starts to increase, blood flow starts to increase because you're wanting to take action based off of whatever's happening.
And so that's and correct me if I'm wrong, that's your sympathetic.
The sympathetic is increased.
Is kicking in. Your fight or flight. You're like, oh,
correct.
I need to get on LinkedIn and start
I
looking
need to
for...
start, yeah. Yes, and then you're having cognitive overload on top of that because it's starting to worry and it's starting to overprocess and overthink when it probably is nothing. And so now you're having to talk yourself down. So that mental break Could be the difference between actually taking action and saying something that you don't want to say, and reassessing and evaluating, was that real or was that not real? Was I projecting? Was I not projecting? Was he talking to me or was he not talking to me? And so that kind of gives you that reset to be like, to strategize and plan, and to go back in with even openness or limitations in how you're viewing the next lecture.
Got it. So that break can also give you the opportunity to activate your parasympathetic
Correct.
nerve system, right?
Yes.
Is that right? Parasympathetic
So
nerve?
it is the parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
But what I would encourage people to do, it's like, this is where people get cognitive fatigue and physical fatigue and emotional fatigue, is that you're at a sympathetic nervous system state, your fight and flight, or you're at your rest and digest, your parasympathetic nervous system.
Rest and digest. I've never heard that before.
No?
I'm gonna remember that
There
forever
you go.
now.
Rest and digest, which is what we're doing right now. So our parasympathetic system is activated right now. But if I said, let's stand up, then automatically our sympathetic nervous system, our flight and fight, would go up. Even though we're not taking action to run out the door, it activates it. But what people do is this all day long. So they're constantly on this like high and low, high and low, high and low. When they get home, they're just crashing,
Right.
because they're so burned out from whatever they mentally, physically, and emotionally. So when you take the break, it's not about just activating the parasympathetic nervous system. It's really getting the two states in balance. And so if you can get them into a state of balance, which is what we call coherence, coherence in the body allows me to react and adapt as my conditions change. That could be the session. That could be the talk that my executive's giving. It could be how I'm going to approach the situation. Whatever it is that I need, then I'm not constantly going high and low all day long. I'm only activating a little bit at a time wherever I need to go. And so my energy conservation is a lot higher. And I can then put mental energy, emotional energy, and physical energy to whatever task that I need to at the time that I need to.
Which means you can sustain it for longer.
Correct. Yep.
Got it.
Yeah.
So those breaks, it's just like in a workout, and like a HIIT workout, where you're working really hard and you take a second,
Yeah.
take a few breaths, and then you get back to it.
But it's the kind of breath that's the difference. So if I'm in between workouts and I'm going, and I'm doing a lot of chest breathing, the chest breathing is not getting me to, woo. Like if you do it really fast, you can get lightheaded.
Right.
Because I'm taking quick oxygen, but it's not actually going to my brain. It's just going from here to here and out. And so in the CO2 level that's coming in and out isn't great.
Right.
But if I'm breathing from my diaphragm, I'm actually uptaking more oxygen. That's allowing the oxygen and blood flow to go to the brain so that I can process and allow it to actually function at the way it's supposed to. So it's how you're taking your breaks is another really big one.
Agreed. Yes, agreed. I just I got an opportunity to speak last week, and I talked about box breathing.
Oh, yeah.
And most people, when they hear box breathing, if you go into the history behind it, they start to check out. And this was like an audio-visual crowd, so the term of the talk was wellness without the woo-woo.
Oh, I love it.
Because it was all these guys,
That's so good.
these AV guys that, just don't care about.
Right.
And they're like, I don't need this hippie crap. And I was like, well, it's actually gotten really famous and I paused. I'm like, actually, are there any service members here? Is there anybody who's been in the military? And like a few people stood up. I'm like, okay, great. Thank you for your service. I said, this comes from the Navy SEALs. Do we have any Navy SEALs here? And everyone just kind of looked around. I was like, okay. But I think we all agree they're like the elite of the elite.
Yeah.
And box breathing is something that they practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not giving you some hippy dippy stuff here.
No.
But it is a method that actually does exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And it can help. I mean, you're talking, I have a 4-year-old and he learns how to do deliberate breathing, belly breathing. It just calms the nervous system down so that I'm not in a constant state. Or if I'm sitting for long periods of time, I'm not having to exude so much energy just to get up and feel like I'm alert all over again. I'm just at this nice little state of balance, and then I can be able to adjust as I need.
By the way, I also feel the need to acknowledge the irony that we're going to have an hour-long conversation when we're talking about attention spans only being 20 minutes. Okay. All right. So morning sessions, 20, maybe 30 minutes at the most, ideally 10-minute breaks in between. You know what's funny is...
Well, so the sessions for the morning, I'll correct you on that one. When I say 20 to 30 minutes, you can still do the hour. But so how you prep the hour is like the introduction could be the first 5 minutes. You go over the key topics, maybe another 5 to 10 minutes. Here's your outline of your objectives that I'm going to go over, or what we're about to accomplish. The meat of it, the really high intense research or whatever it is, or concepts that you're giving out or information, is 20 to 30 minutes. So you have 5, 10, what is that? Already at 40. And then you're just doing highlight reviews. And then the last 10 minutes is your break. So really that hour, you can still do the full hour, but it's just where the intensity of that is only for 20 to 30 minutes.
That's a really good clarifying point. I think executives like to think everything they're saying is important.
Correct.
But I think framing that by the way, I have to have an hour. Okay, great. Here's how we can stage that.
Yeah.
Because I think when you have that conversation with the executive saying, I understand you want an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to help you with that so that people get the most out of that hour as possible.
Yep.
Because if depending on the structure of it, some of the things you might say could be missed.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that's really awesome structuring. So
it's brilliant. I did it with a couple different executive teams as well. And they see, and in that 20 to 30 minutes, like nobody gets to interrupt. And then at the last, like 10 minutes is your questions.
Right.
So that you stay on track. Cause I've been in several different, C-suite level executive meetings, and it's circulating the same topic for about 2 to 3 hours, and it doesn't get off the X. And so I would come in and I'd help structure those meetings, and I'd be the timer. I'd say, like, this is where we're at, holding the agenda for the hour, and then getting everybody up to do some exercise or to walk around or do something different for that break. But after that hour, that goes, whatever questions are left goes back onto the sheet for another deliberate session at a different time, because that wasn't on our schedule for the rest of the day. But
right.
We hit the meat of what we needed to.
So you could get away with essentially 3 1-hour sessions from 9 to noon.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? That's 3 hours? 9 to 10, yeah. You could get away with it if the contents are structured appropriately. Correct. And that has built-in breaks.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, everybody goes to lunch.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk. We're not gonna dig into food too much because we all know. But let's say you don't feed people a whole bunch of carbs and they come back sleepy and rest and digest, as you say. I think we talked about it a little bit, but I just want to revisit it. Post lunch from 1 to 3 o'clock is the opportunity to take advantage of trying to get people outside.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an ability to have natural light in the room, take advantage of that.
Absolutely.
And probably these could be shorter or interactive sessions, right?
Yep. Music is a really good one too, to help wake up the nervous system as well. So before, like, you're coming back from lunch, Tony Robbins and a lot of other really professional speakers will do this. They'll turn on music and get everybody to clap, and they have to dance for at least like 5 minutes before they even start their sessions. And you're talking about high profile people that attend those workshops that he presents, and they all get up and dance. And once you do, like, the mood changes, they feel lighter, they're more engaged, the creativity goes up. So there's art in dancing and putting music or just clapping your hands just to reset the energy and reset the physiology that's happening, the energetic state in the body.
Awesome. We did when we started the last episode. So there's I don't know if you've met him or not, a guy named Ben Hindman.
I don't think I have.
He lives here in Austin now. He started an event technology company.
Okay.
That's the CMO I interviewed. He had this thing that he started doing during the pandemic before meetings, where it was a 30-second thing. We don't have to do it. But it basically, like, you would take one arm and you'd shake it for 5 seconds, then you do the other, and then you do the one leg and then the other, and then you'd count down from 4 and you'd go all the way to 1, but you would do it physically, say it out loud so that you were counting, you were coordinating, you completely took yourself out of and put yourself in the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any preconceived thing you're trying to shake and move, and
Correct.
What does that do? Like, for people's ability to learn and attention, how does that check them in?
So, I mean, you can go into many different ways on this. From a vibrational state, some people during lunch are calling, home, or they're doing personal stuff that might be triggering some emotional states that are more lower vibrational. So it's irritability, frustration, anger, annoyance, worry, whatever. And so they're coming into that post-lunch already kind of flustered. So from a vibrational standpoint, that type of movement grounds them and recreates a different type of vibrational energetic state that allows them to maintain a state of balance in their body, to be able to be in the present. So grounding is, back to that state of balance. And just grounding in itself, because when we're in those lower vibrational ones, we tend to get irritable and restless and don't know what to do with all the energy that's starting to build up. Because if we want to release it, it's probably going to be through just leave me alone. I have so much going on, whatever. But we can't often in that public work setting. And so People try to just hold it in, and you can not, then you end up feeling it as you're walking by that person. And that happens because of our open loop system in our brain, the limbic system, where we can feel those emotional states from people. So we talk about like the woo-woo aspect of it, but this is all from a scientific aspect, that energy state we can feel and transmit because our brains are hardwired to do so. And so when we do those arm circles, counting backwards, it's redirecting and grounding our mind and our body back to its center so that we can be in the present moment.
And you're doing it with everyone else, right?
Yes.
And you feel...
So then you're talking about synchronicity on energetic states. And so we're all collectively connecting together, and we're forming, because there's ways to measure energy up to 3 feet between each other. So if I start to increase my heart rate, I can manipulate your heart rate to increase itself right now if we took like measurements of it.
I was like, oh, you don't,
I
just looked, I was like,
I
does
know,
she
I
have
saw
an
your
Apple
eyes.
Watch on? I want...
Right? But you can. And so like if I start to feel worried, all of a sudden you're going to be like, am I worried I'm saying the right thing? Like, am I doing it right? And you're like, that was weird that it just came over me, but I'm sending that to you, but you also allowed it in. And so if I'm starting to feel that, I have to do a quick check and like, is this mine or is this his? And if it's yours, then I'm going to send that crap back. Like, I don't want that. But that's about being like really aware. We're talking about self-awareness and self-regulation that a lot of people don't do. It's common sense, but it is not commonly practiced. And so...
Yeah, common sense isn't common anymore.
Yeah, not as much.
Okay. All right. So there's it sounds like doing those little micro movements
Yep.
are a big deal, because not only do they help you regulate yourself, but then they also bond you with the rest of the room.
Correct.
And which changes that energy in the room,
Absolutely.
which explains why professional speakers do this, because then they get everyone on the same emotional plane, essentially, right?
Exactly. And then you feel this internal bond. So the same thing with like retreats, when everybody's sitting around sharing stories or similar struggles or experiences, you automatically feel connected for life, or connected way after the event. You're like, they see me, they hear me, but it's because we put down all the walls, and from an energetic state, we've connected. And so that connection is really hard to break sometimes afterwards.
I think that's how I was able to get you to do this episode.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Okay. So post lunch, you want to do some things that get people active. Do people's, should you be, we talked about doing kind of more mundane things or physically present things. Does that time amount change at all? Because I did have a lot of luck one time. We did, we also had a really dynamic presenter, which helped a lot. But
Yeah.
we came back from lunch and we spent it was 2.5 hours
Oh, wow.
building prosthetic hands to go to like third world countries
Wow.
and help people who could not afford them, or the healthcare system didn't have them, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was kind of all the things, right? So people were in teams of 3.
Oh, wow.
We had a dynamic presenter.
Yep.
We would play music. There was a task at hand. We
Yeah.
were unfortunately not outside, but we had the lights up because they had to be able to see,
Right.
and they were assembling things. They were decorating the bags.
Oh, that's cool.
They showed stories of people that were getting them. Like it felt like emotionally it ticked all the right boxes.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious to dig into like what, and that went from like 1 to 3:30, but it was the highlight of people's responses on their surveys. They're
that's
like,
awesome.
I can't believe the company like took this time to give back so much, and like they really responded to it. And while I feel good about that, I'm kind of curious, were there certain things that we triggered in people that made that difference, so that as we think about what to do with people in the afternoon,
Yeah.
what are the things that we can do to engage those people?
So the number one thing that I took from what you just said that came up for me was the emotional connection. When people are emotionally invested, they did a really good job on the hook of that, of creating this, the why. Why is this so important? So you go back to those 3 levels of empathy. Right. Here's our problem. These people don't have it, right? If we could get this to them, look at how many people we could change. Here's a personal guy. So now I know the person. I know how he feels and the struggles that he's going through. I may not know personally, physically, but I can understand it and see it from their perspective. And now I'm doing something, that empathic concern, I'm doing something about it by creating it. And so when I have that level of empathy and emotional investment,
it doesn't matter what time
engagement,
of day.
I mean, if you think about it from like a kid or a spouse or in a relationship, it could be so tired when I come home from work, but my kid needs me. Somehow I just draw up energy out of nowhere to be able to be fully engaged in that moment for them. Not all the time, but sometimes. So that emotional investment is a really big key to keeping the why factor alive and allowing people to stay engaged. That's one. The other one, it sounds like that there was a lot of different was it like sections?
So each team of 3 got like a box.
Okay.
And they opened the box. And at one point, there was only one tool, and they like told the person with the tool, like, okay, raise it up. All right, now move.
Yeah.
And like the person, and then everybody had to switch around.
So that's what I was about to say. So like the movement piece, having to constantly move helps the brain like redirect its attention. So you guys did small little attention bursts. Music is another small attention burst, the emotional aspect to that. And then you guys had a complex task that you were completing. Not probably the best. It might not be complex because you guys might have had standard directions where it was pretty simplified. So I don't think it was as complex. It was more engaging than anything, right?
Yeah,
so
no, they had instructions.
So if I can follow through it and not have to try to create on my own in that moment, then it's easier to follow. Like if you give me a step-by-step to follow, my brain knows what it needs to complete in a time that the deficit of attention is at its lowest. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Okay, so for example purposes, because you can't necessarily do that every day,
right?
And sometimes these conferences are multi-day, would the afternoon be times to get kind of feedback or roundtable sessions where people can talk about what's important in their world and whatnot, to try to at least elicit that emotional portion so that they're invested in the session?
Yeah, so you can talk about like things that are important, but they're not urgent. So if things are urgent and important, those are like things that are happening more in the morning. The not important, not urgent is usually during the afternoon, that postprandial dip time. And then ones that are important but not urgent is usually what I'm happening. So important is getting feedback and information, but also giving them some level of investment to that as well. Again, that the why factor, what we call the bottom line up front, or what's in it for me. What's in it for me if I give you back this feedback? Why is this going to be so important if I do? And so you want to have that connection with them as well to have full engagement.
Okay.
Because I think that's where a lot of these networking events or even in meetings go wrong. It's always about the company and the executive team. But why is it important that I'm giving it to you? Because I'm important to this company, but it's not often seen that way. This task over here is important, which is normal. But why? How can you show me that I'm valuable in this part of the problem, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Okay. So I feel like we have a good, I think the whole point though is right after lunch, you need to do something that's interactive.
Absolutely. Get
people engaged on either an emotional or physical level so that they aren't just sitting there and falling asleep.
Correct. Yep. I would agree.
We'll call that approximately 3:00. Then you get a break.
Yep.
How important are breaks in the sense of there's kind of like the speedy brain breaks, right? Where you go and you reset and you level set and then you go back to sessions. But a lot of times there's like, mid-morning or mid-afternoon breaks that tend to be a little longer. There's usually sugar at the afternoon break.
Yeah.
And it tends to be usually like a half hour. Usually it's sugar and caffeine. And that's like your marathon of like, okay, we got 90 minutes left and we're going to be done with this for the day. I think we talked earlier about caffeine and its lasting effects, and or some people obviously are either minimally affected or not affected at all by it.
Yeah.
But that you have this 90-minute window post break. How important are those two things to each other, and what should someone try to accomplish in an ideal world with that, let's call it the 2-hour window, instead of just like what should we be giving people to eat so that they're able to finish their day strong, and then what kind of programming do you think would be ideal in that situation?
So at this point they're having like that kind of early dinner time frame, but most of the people that leave these events aren't eating until almost like 7:00 for dinner. So having another small like meal, having protein bars, some of the like mid-afternoon snacks would be, what are those called? Oh my gosh.
Like the Cliff Bars?
Yes. That's
okay.
Yeah. They're like little mini ones that they hand out too.
Got it. Okay. Which are usually very simple carbs.
Correct.
As opposed to like think of carbs as because they use simple sugars, they use fruit, obviously would be another good one.
So whenever we're working on a national assignment with some of these elite athletes, we'll have a snack bar out for like morning and afternoon sessions, and they're pretty much the same for both. But we'll have a lot of the clip bars. We'll have, what is it, Noom? Or no, it's like NOO, something like that. It comes in a little bottle, but they're like little energy water breakdown things that help refuel the body for like electrolytes and everything else in between. I can't think of the name. I can see our whole spread that we have. But we have like oranges and bananas. We have, they're like little waffle honey.
Oh, the Strupen waffles or
Yes.
whatever they are.
They're like really thin.
Really thin.
Yes.
You can like put them on top of a coffee and it melts them and they're delicious.
I think so, yeah. So we have some of those. And it depends on some of these athletes that come with us. And if we're talking like a normal work week or school week, they're at school all day long, and the last time they ate was at lunch.
Right.
And they're coming to practice around 5 o'clock, and they haven't ate anything in between. And so we're setting up now snacks before they get there, like around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, doing homework and then going into practices, just because their body is so. And then they're like, I'm just tired. I don't want to work out. Well, they have no energy.
Their blood sugars dropped.
Absolutely.
They processed everything they ate.
Yep. So really encouraging even like club gyms, because they don't do that either, of like, hey, we need to create a snack bar for some of these athletes that aren't even able to eat until like 11 or 12, or that was the last time that they ate. But yeah, we do a lot of more protein snacks, if anything. We have like the beef jerky. We have some of those there.
Makes sense.
I'm trying to think what else.
That's okay. Okay, so
some
now
applesauce is another one that we do.
I think it's pretty simple in the sense of it's like good, clean, simple sugars
Correct.
And proteins.
Yes.
Try to avoid the fats as much as possible.
Correct.
Fats have more calories in them for a reason. Mm-hmm. They also then can make you feel lethargic.
For sure. So typically, if you're doing carbs, the most would be at the lunchtime. Like that would be your heaviest time to, or not heaviest, but the time to have the most amount of carbs. Same thing with morning. You're not doing a whole lot of carbs. And then the afternoon is the same too.
Got it. Okay.
For smaller meals with it.
And now where is your brain at after you have this nice break? I think it's important, especially if you just did something interactive, to give people some time to debrief and process and talk to other people during that break. And then they're going to go in and they're like, oh, now we got to listen to this. Like what kind of programming could you put at the end of that time there to get people excited to go back into the room?
So I think that one of the things that people miss the most is that they talk from just an auditory aspect and not incorporating all types of learning styles. So we haven't really even gone into like brain waves and the way that people operate. When we're talking about beta waves, there's some people that can just stay constant engaged. So beta is like your thinking process. Your theta waves are people who are more creative in nature, but they're slower. Not slower like mentally or physically, but they can't sustain attention for longer periods of time. So their duration of attention is really short. So they take really intense focus periods, but then they have more times where they have to do immediate breaks, and then intense, and then more breaks, where your beta waves aren't necessarily that way. And then you have your alpha waves, which is what we call like your zone type states, where if the people are like zoning out, someone watching TV is probably in your alpha state, and they walk right by you, and then you look over and you're like, how did you get over there? Like you were just right here. And they were like, I just walked right in front of you. What are you talking about? So those are your alpha waves as well. And then you go into your delta waves, and which is your more sleep states. But there are people that operate in beta and theta waves. Their brain, in which you're talking about, like how can they stay engaged or focused, it really depends on like how you are as an individual. So we try to program for everybody, but we don't attend to everybody. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And even then, we're only...
Let's pause for a second. I want to repeat what you said. We try to plan for everybody, but we don't attend to everybody.
Correct.
I think that's kind of a massive statement.
Yeah.
And as we are all trying to get better at inclusivity,
yes.
There is an increased focus on that, which is great. I think that's a really, really key statement.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Thank you for saying that.
You're welcome. But I also think that's on the person that's attending the event to know themselves well. Because one, it's nice to know about the attendees and like the population. So understanding your audience of who's coming and what their attention styles are typically like.
Which is tough in like a big organization, right?
So tough. But then now when you get to that point where you're in a big organization, you're hitting styles of attention. So you have your auditory listeners, you have your kinesthetic listeners, you have your vision listeners. So if I can incorporate all these different types of learning styles and attention styles, then I might be able to attend to most people, but I'm having to incorporate them in the way that I'm presenting. So by having some slides or having some handouts where the kinesthetic people can hold on to it and touch it and grab it, listening to how your participants or your employees talk. So someone who isn't more of an auditory listener would say something like, "Oh, I hear what you're saying." They would say something like, "I've listened to that before." And so you hear the words hear and listen, that already cues you in that they're more auditory in nature. Someone who's more vision would say what? What do you think?
I see what you're talking about.
Yeah, look at that. I can't imagine what that would be like. And so they're trying to create an image. So if they're like, "Hey, what are you thinking about this?" And they say, "Well, I don't know. I can't see that in my head, or I can't imagine it." You know that they need some type of physical or visual aspect of it. Someone who's kinesthetic in nature, what do you think that they would say? Or how they would respond to things?
I like this. This turned into a quiz. This is fun. I need to write that down.
Oh, that's a good one. Or I can't wrap my brain around it. Like I can't wrap and they'll start to physically move their body with like I needing to touch it. So paying attention as a leader, an executive team, to your employees is probably more critical than anything. And then you can attend and run sessions based off of how most of them are or all of them are.
I think how to do that, someone would probably have to sit down with you and pay you a lot of money to be like, okay, I have to present to 400 people. How do I possibly attend all of these people?
Yeah.
I think two out of the three are pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Which can be adjusted with your visual cues and your audio cues.
Correct.
But I think I don't want to do the kinetic learner.
The physical aspect. Yeah.
That's a tough one to do.
But when you talk about movement, that's what that is.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, look at that.
So we're incorporating
Didn't I just learn something? So, okay. All right, cool.
Which is a lot of people are more physical and not that you're just one or the other. Like a lot of people are multi-sensory or I'm visual and kinesthetic. I like it more. So if you were to talk to me in a lecture form, which is why I struggle in a lot of those conferences, because I'm like, that's great. But if I'm not writing it down and it looks like I'm not paying attention or I'm doodling, that's just how my brain is like, okay, I can hear it now because I'm writing it versus just staring at you, watching you move your mouth the whole time.
Got it.
Yeah. So it's just dependent on the person, but there are ways to be able to engage everybody.
I love that. Where are people at mentally in the afternoon? Are they done? Like, is 3:00? Is that why school ends at 3:00? You know what I mean? Or is there because people want to go? Sometimes I've seen sessions go till like 6:00, and people are like, "Oh my God, kill me."
I'm not a fan of the school system and how they run their.
Okay,
their
well, fair enough.
So,
I thought there might be a reason.
I can't give you an exact reason why the school does the way that they do, but
that's a different that's a different type of podcast.
Because even here recently, some of the school districts like pushed back some of the hours to where kids weren't getting, like my daughter was one of them. They started school at 9:05 and they didn't get out till 4:55. Yeah. So when you're talking about like attention and cognitive fatigue and like dinner versus like they're not getting home. So she wouldn't get off the bus until almost 5:30.
This sounds a lot like these conferences though.
Yes.
So that's why I kind of am asking like that mid-afternoon break, we give people some simple sugar and some protein and give them some good options. And maybe if they want to make the choice to have caffeine, that next 90 minutes, like what do you have left in them that you can tailor to ensure that they're still walking away with something and feel like their time was well spent?
This is where I would do more of the applied work. So when we talked about the circadian rhythm in the wake maintenance zone later in the afternoon,
right,
getting physically involved, whether that's lifting something or like implementing something hands-on, causes the brain to stay more engaged because of the circadian rhythm that their 24-hour like life cycle that they're on.
Got it.
Is what I'd probably do the most, which is why a lot of the sports are in the afternoon. Well, then again, that's also because of school, that they're in school, but that's nicely designed that way too.
Got it.
Whether that's intentional or not, but
Okay, so you theoretically you could use your afternoon as you could split it almost into two to be like an emotional portion right after lunch to get people to get them invested in what's happening, and then potentially a physical aspect where they're doing some type of, I don't know, they go to a food bank or some type of CSR activity.
Yeah.
Like,
So let me backtrack. Your question to the emotional piece, or the statement about the emotional piece, I was referring to why that event was
got
so
it.
effective.
Okay. All right. Apologies.
Because you guys were emotionally engaged and it stimulated everybody's learning styles. From the 12 to 3 period, that is just where you're doing not important, not urgent tasks. So if I had to go to a meeting, this is where I would have everybody, something that we've all done before. So pitching would be a good one. Let's just practice pitching, because my senior pitch, like if I'm doing a sales pitch, my senior executive team probably could go through those, but I want the other ones to learn how to do that more automatic. So things that are more automatic don't cause a lot of mental, physical, emotional stimulation. That's probably the best time to do that.
Got it.
Or I'm closing deals during that time, because I've done it so many times that it just rolls off the tongue and I don't have to cognitively think about it. I know the person, I've studied the person, whoever it is that I'm going to, I've done like my target profile kind of thing. Then I'm going out and closing deals during that period because I know their attention isn't as high. And so they're more likely to say yes during that period.
Right.
So I'm initially engaging sales during those times. And so then I would work on my employees doing that same type of automatic memory, remote memory type of information.
So this would be a great time for like QBRs or things of that nature.
Correct.
Because they do them all the time on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
Deal reviews, things of that
Yes.
nature, or project updates or stand-ups or things of that
Correct.
nature.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So then once you hit past like that 3 o'clock mark, then you can go back into like completing important tasks, but they don't have to be urgent, because I still have, my brain has either had some stimulants, got some vitamin D, got up and moved. So I've gotten almost that second wind effect.
Yep.
Where that last outburst of energy comes up and it's like, okay, I'm ready to finish. So then whatever task that it is can be completed at that point.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. It's just not urgent. The urgent importance at the morning.
Got it. Okay. And now it's time for the party, because there's always a party or a
there
dinner
is.
or something. I have expressed very openly, very publicly that depending on what you do for a party, you're completely undermining everything that's going to take place the next day. But don't get me wrong, I have thrown my awards dinners. I have made sure that there was breakfast burritos on the line the next morning because I knew people were going to be rolling in, especially if those events are in Vegas or things of that nature.
Oh, yeah.
I think those evening events are really designed to be about camaraderie and spending time with each other over and above anything else. But I think there is some real value to having an appropriate cutoff in way of bar, it being open, because they usually are, and the time as to when you do that. I mean, what people are going to choose to do, we can't control them.
I was just about to say
It's not even feasible, and it's not cool if you tried.
Right.
But what you are sponsoring and what you are setting them up for, when people have to pay out of pocket, sometimes it changes their perception on things.
Correct.
I've always cut parties off at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Because if you cut off at 10 o'clock at night and your session isn't until, let's call it 11 hours later, you have given that person the autonomy to decide if they want to self-sabotage or not.
Right. Essentially.
Right?
Yeah.
But the parties are, I'm curious, what have you seen? I'm sure you've seen some really bad networking events. What are some of the better things that you have seen that help people really, especially if now we live in a highly remote world, and sometimes these are the first time people are getting to meet each other ever, especially as companies are growing. What are some things that you have seen that's really helped people build those bonds when they're when they may be an introverted person and they're at a company event for the first time and they're like, how do I make friends at this thing?
Yeah. I'd say the one that I've seen the best has been where you come in with no name tag and nobody knows if you're the boss, not the boss, your background, your titles, or all the things. You're just a human being like they are, here to experience. And I think it's more of the experiential aspect to a lot of these events that create instant trust and buy-in by people. And then later, so the name, the phone number, the email, that's out the door, because when you go to a lot of these networking events, it's about, oh, I have to connect with this person, but it's so surfacey that it never feels like I can break that barrier of really understanding and knowing who you are. It's just like, what do you do? What do you have to offer me? Here's my card, here's my email, we'll get in contact. And it's like, I don't even know who you are. Kind of got a gist of it, but I don't even have the warm and fuzzy, so I don't even know if I want to connect again. But if I leave all of that out and we knew that everybody was going to get an email and the names and we don't have to worry about any of that, and we can truly invest in like what you do and how you do it, how do you connect with people, what do you have to offer, what's your gift, what's your superpower, then I get to be in the moment with you, learn from you, embrace from you, and vice versa. So when you talk about introverts, that they don't have to feel like they have to open up immediately to have to engage that conversation. They can be a part of the group.
Right.
And when they feel comfortable, then they can start to engage. Or you have the people that are extroverts that notice it. And so they're like, hey, one-on-one. And then you automatically have that connection to where then they feel like they can open up into the group. As far as the parties aspect, I've been a part of them myself. I'd lie if I didn't. Part of that is like being a single mom of two. It's like, I finally get to go out. This is so nice. Like, here we go. And then the other part where I've stopped not going to a lot of those parties is I don't want the perception of whatever I do that night is not going to come back and haunt me the next day in a professional setting. And so there's a really fine balance. And I think that when you set that up at the company event of like, this is our expectations of you as professionals of this organization. What you choose to do is on you. So it's almost like giving your kid the guidelines before they go out.
Right.
And whatever you choose to do, that's great. But after a drink or two with people is usually when I'm done. Like 2 is maybe max. And then I'm out, because I don't need to cross that line.
Right.
Because when that line gets crossed, it's a very hard thing to get back on the page that you were before. Credibility, authority, respect, trust, all of it. One wrong move, one wrong word or phrase, or, it's hard to.
Some people don't have any of that going into the event, so they're fine.
That's true.
No, I love that. I think one of the things that I really love seeing is like I was part of an event one time that like someone came up to me at the end of the night and they're like, that felt like a wedding.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it was a corporate event, and they're like, everyone was dancing on the dance floor. They nothing got weird.
Yeah.
Everyone behaved themselves. They were just in a good space.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really shooting for.
Yeah.
And I think we can all do that responsibly as planners. And that's why the time thing is helpful, because it helps people understand.
To cut it off yes, I would agree with that. You're creating a safe space for them to be able to like unwind, but still be able to be in camaraderie with everybody. But that there does need to be a cutoff at some point. I mean, the pace or places that I was talking about is that the conference will end at, let's just say, like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and then everybody's open. So we've gone to Vegas for several of our stuff too. And everybody's out till 2, 3 in the morning, and then you're showing back up for your 7 a.m. session, and it's hard. Or there's nobody at your session because everybody was out the night before.
Yeah, if you're scheduling a session at 7 a.m. in Vegas, you're basically asking for people not to show up to your session.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah, Vegas gets the better of people. I would like to talk a little bit about movement, and we talked about it a little bit, but there's a book I read that you've probably read called Spark.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
I have.
There's like so much good stuff in there. I'm a big fan of scheduling. I always, in the morning, I schedule workouts that are of various levels, because different people do different things. And I really just want people to go out and move. On a scale of 1 to 10, I think it's a personal thing, but I'd love to get your thoughts on how important do you think it is offering people that opportunity to intentionally do something, be it yoga, be it meditation, be it a bodyweight boot camp, or just like going for a run. Like how can that impact the entire rest of the day?
Vastly. So one, to the importance of having that as an opportunity for people, I think, is critical. Again, the lives back at home when they're not at these events are so limited in time and energy. And if we're talking about like people with kids and spouses and all the other things in between, you don't have a whole lot of time to, unless you're waking up at like 4 and 5 in the morning, which is very doable too. It's just making it a priority or not. But when you're having at these events and making it a part of it, then I'm more likely to go because everybody else is doing it. So then you're having the social proof aspect. When you talk about the persuasion of principles, that social proof is a really big one. If other people are going to do it, then I might as well do it too. And then you're talking about just from the brain and physiology aspect of what that does from a chemical level and all the endorphins that they're getting to feel good about themselves, to feel ready, to feel excited about what's about to come throughout that day.
And it literally helps people learn better, right?
Yeah, it does.
Exercise primes the brain to learn.
Correct.
I could try to quote some parts from that book, and I don't know how long ago it was that you read it.
It was a bit.
Can you, for a high level and a simpleton like myself, can you recap kind of why exercise primes your brain to learn?
It's the different chemicals that are being released in the brain that's causing a complete endorphin release, that feel-good stimulant in the body, if you will.
Okay. That is very simple, and I love it. There's a lot of videos that have been going around on Instagram about these studies that have come out recently about the fact that there's one woman who quoted this study, and I read the study and I didn't find the term anywhere, but she called the muscle excretions from when you contract your muscles, they said they were called hope molecules. Have you seen this reel?
I haven't.
No? Okay, I'll send it to you. Which I was like, okay, that seems
okay.
that's a little woo-woo. But the idea was that the enzymes that your muscles excrete when they're contracted actually help fight off anxiety.
Yep, infections.
Depression.
Yep.
All of the above from a clinical aspect. What is biologically happening so that anybody who listens to this knows that we're not just making it up and using the term hope molecules, which sounds amazing.
It does sound amazing. You're looking at the mood regulators. And so we're talking about the emotional part of the brain. So every thought that you have has a biochemical release, which creates emotion. And so as humans, we have about 70 to 80,000 thoughts a day. We probably are only cognizant of maybe like 10 of those thoughts. If I asked you, what did you think about this morning? And you're like, I don't know. But when we had a transaction between someone that was memorable, we were like, oh, I thought about blank. But in between that period, so I like to use the example of someone cutting me off on the highway. If somebody cut me off, I can get like raging pissed immediately. I'm just like, what are you doing? And then the next moment I could probably be in tears if I had my kids in the back. And it could be because I had the thought of like, how dare him? He almost hit us. I'm using him. It could be or her too, not just a guy. But that person cut me off and I'm like, why did they do that? And then all of a sudden I'm like, that was really scary. We were almost close to getting hit and falling off, whatever. And now I was worried that I just lost my tooth. And so then I got sad. Every thought in between there has a release of chemicals, which is why I can be raging to then being tearful or sad in that same moment. And most people are like, well, you just don't know how to regulate your emotions, but it's the different thoughts that we have that are producing them. And so when we're exercising and we're having this thought of like, this feels good, this is hard, or this is worthy, or this is...
How about this is fucking miserable?
But you can, but then you're still having the release in the bodies of the different, like the enzyme release and stuff too. Yes, it's horrible, but the reward of it is what you're feeling. And so we're talking about the emotion piece of it. So yes, this is horrible, but it's not horrible to where I want to cry and get mad about it, because it's not that you're messing up. This is just hard. And so you can get mad that like maybe you didn't do a PR for that workout. But that's someone that's been in it for a while, but you know the benefits at that point of what the workout's doing for you. The ones that are just starting out where it's like, ooh, this is really hard, but I can feel it. So we're talking about the emotion part, the feeling of it, that biochemical release is what's creating those hope molecules in the body to make it continuously still feel good.
Got it. Okay, I think we're unfortunately just about at time.
Yeah.
Last final question. What's something that you have learned in all your studies with working with all these people at various in various occupations, but all at very elite levels? what's something that the normal person can use as a tool to help them either self-regulate their emotions or how they react to things, or just perform a little better?
Yeah.
Is there like any like tip or trick or something that you're like, I know this thing, I wish everybody knew it?
This sounds super cliche. There's 2 of them probably, and this too shall pass, and trust the process. Those are more quotes than anything else, not necessarily simple steps. And the simple step to that I'll tell you in a second. But this too pass, from an emotional standpoint, our emotions are like a parade. And so if I'm watching it just go by, another one's going to eventually come up within like seconds of each other, and not holding on to that emotional state, but being able to be aware of it and process it. But then trusting the process of where I'm at isn't where I'm going to be. It's not a finite state. It's always moving, whether based on the choices that I'm making, it's still moving. But trusting the process that where I'm at right now is exactly where I'm supposed to be. People try to rush the process or avoid the process, but knowing that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, even though it doesn't feel good sometimes or I feel delayed, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. So trusting that part, I think I wish everybody knew and accepted more than anything else. So with that acceptance piece of how you trust the process, there's this 3 little words that I often say is, so what? Of like, so what that happened? It didn't go well. It's not like I'm not okay with it, but so what? Or it's okay first. So, okay, that happened. I'm accepting that. So what? So what do I want to do about it? Now what? Now I can soak in it, or I can look at the aerial exchange of it, of understanding what I need to do to be better, to trust, or to move forward. And then the now what piece is actually taking action for it. So, okay, so what, now what?
That reminds me, I had a boss that told me something once. I was working for an events agency. We had a mishap. I completely dropped the ball. I missed something.
Yeah.
And it impacted like 50 people because we had a session that ended early. The agenda had bumped up a half hour, and it ended early, and there weren't buses there when they were supposed to be there. And that was solely on me. It was like my biggest fuck up I've had professionally. And fortunately, I had a boss at the time or a manager on site, and he said, okay, we'll just take everyone to the bar. The buses started showing up. We started loading people up. The last bus was stuck in traffic. He goes, let's just take everyone to the bar. We'll distract them until the last bus gets here, and then we'll put them on, and we'll be on our way.
Yeah.
Everyone finally leaves. I am beating myself up over this. I'm like, I can't believe I did this.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. And once I got into the meeting room by myself, I called my boss, and I said, hey, here's what happened.
Right.
And she goes, okay, so do you think you'll ever not do that again? I was like, absolutely not. And she goes, all right, well, you can take, she goes, well, what time is it? It was like, I don't know, 2:43.
Yeah.
And she goes, you can have until 3 o'clock to beat yourself up over it. And then after that, you got to move on.
Yeah.
And I was like, and she was such a hard ass. I thought for sure, I was like, this is the day I get fired. Yeah. And she's like, you get 15 minutes.
Yep.
Beat yourself up over it as much as you want and then move on. So I love that.
I like that too, because I tell a lot of our athletes as well, or even just professionals and human beings in counseling departments, where it's like you set a timer, but you have to like look at yourself really mad in the mirror. Like you have to make really angry faces because you're mad. So you might as well stay mad, but you got to watch yourself be mad and be like, oh, and so then you just start laughing like I look ridiculous being this mad. But then going back to the piece of, so what do I want to do about it? So okay that this happened. It's not okay that it happened, but okay, period. Like this happened. I'm accepting it for what it is, not for what I want it to be. Now what do I want to do about it? And then I'm taking action to either improve or sulk, whatever it is.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this as much as I did.
This was awesome.
Thank you for coming in and hanging out. We had a great facility.
Oh, this is beautiful.
Thanks to our audio engineer.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that's a wrap. Thank you to Olympian Meetings for sponsoring this. And we will see you next month in May, I think. Yeah. Awesome. This is going to come out at the end of April.
Yay.
So if you have any questions, you can either comment on the YouTube channel or you can email me directly, and I'm happy to pass them along. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right.